Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Today we will talk, today is the first part of the three-part training series on gender mainstreaming for the Global South project. And today we'll especially cover the topic on gender and gender analysis. So this presentation will roughly take 40 minutes and it'll be followed by a Q&A session. And let's move on to the next slide. So this training, as I've mentioned before, it consists of three parts. And the first part which is today, is gender mainstreaming and gender analysis. A second part is identifying data, indicators, and monitoring and evaluation. And third is on implementation and communication. And the second part will take place in December, and then the third part will take place sometime in January next year. This is not, maybe some of you may have participated in the previous training, but for some of you, this could be your first time. But now I would like to talk about the objectives of today's training. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So the objectives of today's training is twofold. So first is to recapitulate on gender equality and its implications for your business success. We'll go through case studies and the important elements of gender mainstreaming. And second point is preparation for the inception report and implementation. So we ask all the companies to submit an inception report, and in this inception report we would ask more about gender mainstreaming actions that you are planning to take, but in a further detail, even more so than in the proposal that you have submitted. So these are the two main objectives, but provided that some of you it's maybe your first time today to join such gender mainstreaming session from UNIDO, I'll also do a bit of, I'll also cover a bit about UNIDO's approach to gender mainstreaming as well. So let's move on to the next slide. So the first main question is, why should we care about gender equality? Should we care because gender equality is the right thing to do? Of course it is, but beyond that, why do we have to care about gender equality? Is it because it's one of the SDG goals, SDG 5, and that it has linkages with other SDGs? I mean, those are all very valid points. However, let's take a further look about how gender equality is actually related to your business success. So let's move on to the next slide. So today I'd like to introduce you a very good example of a UNIDO project called UNIDO Pride. This has been awarded, has received awards about their gender mainstreaming and inclusivity initiatives. And this project is based in India in the automotive industry, and it looked at improving efficiency, safety standards, productivity, digitalization, skills up, capacity building, and employment creation. And this video will present to you about how important gender mainstream was in order to make such a business enhancement in every aspect of their processes. So let's take a look at it.
उदय प्राइड ने मुझे श्रेष्ठता हासिल करने के लिए मशीनरी और उपकरणों का ज्ञान दिया है, जिससे मुझे अपने ही कार्यक्षेत्र में आगे बढ़ने का अवसर भी मिला है.
The automobile industry forms the backbone of the Indian manufacturing sector, contributing nearly 6.4% of India's GDP and 35% of its manufacturing GDP. And India's automotive component industry is experiencing a silent revolution, employing nearly 3 million people. It is paving the way for India to become a global hub for automotive components. To fuel this growth, UNIDO initiated the UDAY Pride program in 2019 in collaboration with ACMA, funded by the Ministry of Heavy Industries, Government of India.
Deployed in 275 companies nationwide, Uday Pride is enhancing productivity, quality, and female workforce participation through shop floor interventions, counseling, and e-learning courses, contributing to SDG 5 and SDG 9.
Taking Jai Hind Autotech as a prime example, their productivity has increased significantly.
Our company has witnessed a significant shift towards inclusivity and gender equality, with 30 to 40% of the workforce comprising of women, surpassing the industry average of 12%.
A higher participation of women has led to a 15% increase in FIFO score, with 48% improvement suggestions coming from women employees.
न केवल मेरा आत्मविश्वास बढ़ा है, बल्कि मुझे नए सपने देखने की शक्ति भी मिली है.
This success story is not an isolated incident. The Uday Pride project is showing remarkable progress in promoting workforce diversity in other clusters, such as Coimbatore, Chennai, and Mysore in southern India, underscoring the fact that empowering women isn't just a social endeavor, but also a catalyst for economic growth.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Right, so as we have seen from the video, when men and women are treated fairly, companies become more productive and more profitable. And as we have seen in the video, they did also in the project observe increase in business profitability and efficiency. They measured these using such KPIs, including the 5 S's. And also the second point is increased workplace innovation. As we have seen in the video as well, they have said that there was an increase in improvement suggestions from these project workplaces on how a workplace can be better improved, and much of it more than 40% of them came from the female employees. So having a diverse workforce doesn't only mean being a diverse workforce, it means that you had different ideas and different perspectives in a very a variety of perspectives, which can lead to new ideas, new innovative ideas, and hence the result of increase in workplace innovation. Third part is attracting more talent. In this age of globalization, at the same time aging population, and also and in some industries we're also seeing labor shortages, and hence it becomes very important to attract more talent. And in this case, if you are able to offer a very inclusive workplace where men and women are treated fairly in terms of compensation, in terms of training opportunities, in terms of supporting individuals' needs to balance their work-life balance, it has implication on how attractive you are as an employer. So in that sense, both women and men are even more so attracted to companies that have a very good package of employment conditions. Hence hence having including gender perspectives into workplace design, how you do things, how you manage the employees, have implications on attracting talent that are very much needed to your company. And this also relates to the next point of employee retention. In many countries, we still see that there is a higher rate of women in terms of women leaving the company, especially at the times of life events. So, for example, marriages, giving birth, childcare, and taking care of their elderly member of the family. And the key here is, how do you make sure that these people who may reduce their work hours, who may prefer to work from home, who may take time off of work for a specific period, or that they come back to your workplace? That is one question. And this question really matters because employee turnover. When people leave, it is a very costly business because first you have to think about all the costs included on and recruiting a new person, then training a new person and supervising the new person to keep up to the level of the person who have left. When the person leaves, all the effort that you have put into developing that person, their knowledge and skills is gone, basically. So in order to fill in that gap means that there's a lot of costs that the companies have to consider. And having a workplace that is fair, that is just, and that is and that meets the needs of both male and female employees very much have a strong linkage with retaining the employees. Now, next point, increase business reputation. So having a corporate culture that is diverse and inclusive and respect the rights of every woman and man have implication on business reputation. It's not only about the organizational culture that you make, not only the teamwork, but it has implication on the business reputation. If people hear that you are a good employer, for example, that has a very much implication on how the company presents itself, not only to the future employees, but also their customers as well. And if you do any kind of productive gender mainstreaming measures into your business plan, and if you proactively talk about it, communicate it to the outside world, that would have a positive implication on your business reputation. And last point is about being fair and right. As I have said, gender equality is one of the SDGs, which have a very much profound linkage to other SDG goals. So now let's move on to the next slide. And this is a question that I often get. Is gender mainstreaming, gender equality actually relevant to my industrial sector? The simple answer to this question is yes, it is. And the reason why is because regardless of the industry, there's always going to be a discrepancy when it comes to let's say, women and men labor participation, pay gap, representation of women and men in different professions, different management groups, and there is going to be a different sets of values and sets of prejudices, understanding, and about women and men taking part in the job in the industry. So in that sense, gender is indeed relevant to every industrial sector. And the next slide will show you a video of the renewable energy sector, which is often case a very male-dominated industry across the globe. And the video will show you how gender is indeed very much interlinked with every step in the supply chain, and also different levels of management, and its implication, the implication of gender in terms of business success and sustainability measures. So let's take a look at it.
Climate change and energy poverty are two of humanity's biggest challenges, with women and girls being disproportionately impacted. Due to traditional gender roles in many countries, it is still largely women and girls who are relying on traditional biomass in households and for their businesses. Therefore, compared to men and boys, they are more likely to be exposed to negative effects such as time poverty and indoor air pollution. At the same time, women can be powerful agents of change. They are manufacturing products using renewable energy. They are becoming clean tech entrepreneurs, and they are advocating for sustainable energy. Enhanced gender equality in the energy sector leads to better outcomes for people, businesses, and the planet. Studies have shown a correlation between a company's gender diversity and its resource efficiency. That companies with more gender diversity at the board level are more successful, and that companies with more women in leadership roles are more likely to invest in renewable energy and to reduce carbon emissions. Yet the sustainable energy sector remains male-dominated. Women-led enterprises and startups in the sector receive less funding, and only 32% of full-time employees are women. Most of them work in administrative jobs, and they are particularly underrepresented in decision-making positions. Advancing gender equality and empowering women increases the effectiveness of sustainable energy solutions and can help to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, UNIDO mainstreams gender dimensions across its portfolio and empowers women through targeted actions.
من خلال النوليدج والاكسبيرينس اللي انا اخدتها من المشروع قدرت دلوقتي الحمد لله ابقى واقفه قدامكم وانا جروب انرجي مانجر في اورينتال ويفر.
Educational systems are still centered around those outdated beliefs of what women should study and pursue. The greatest benefit of programs like UNIDO's is that it diminishes this gap.
It will take an intentional and collective effort for us to shed these exclusive norms and to adopt new, more inclusive norms.
The full and active engagement and leadership of women is central to the achievement of the sustainable energy transition and the advancement of sustainable and inclusive development.
So let's move on to the next slide, please. Can we go to the slide one before? Thank you. Another question is often that's received is about whether industrial development has a direct linkage with gender equality. So if a country economically develops, does that automatically mean that the country is more gender equal? And the answer to this question is not so easy, as in it's not very straightforward. And I'll give you an example of three countries, the BRICS countries, for Brazil, India, and South Africa. And as you see from this graph, India and Brazil have indeed, successfully developed since the 1990s economically. Their GDPs has increased, increase, especially India, in comparison to South Africa. However, if you look at the labor force participation rate for women, which is just one aspect of indicator to see how the level of gender equality in a country. But what you see is that despite the fact that, for example, India has, very much economically developed in the past decades. When it comes to labor force participation, it has been, more or less at 30%, and it even declined in the past few years as well. And at the same time, for Brazil and South Africa, it actually maintained around 50%. So what this tells you that industrial development or economic development per se doesn't really trickle down to gender equality. And there's different factors that takes place, let's say policy making, making sure that those policy work, also, private sector, public sector engagement, and so forth. So, so what this tells you is that we cannot just simply wait for gender equality to happen. So let's move on to the next slide. So what does the previous information tells us in summary? So first point is that gender equality boosts businesses and the economy. So as we have seen from the slides, that gender equality has a positive impact at the business level, supply chain or industrial level, and also for the economy. And then the second point is gender equality is relevant across industrial sectors. Third point is economic development or industrial development does not automatically result in gender equality. So what this all is telling us is that we need to make proactive action for gender equality and women's empowerment. Having said that, what can we do? So let's move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So In the previous slides, we went through this Uday Pride project of UNIDO, and I'm going to give you a bit more detail about what this project has done, because this project has very much made a remarkable difference in the Indian automotive industry. So let's move on to the second slide. The next slide. Thank you. So as mentioned before, as a background, this project was done in the automotive industry in India. It targeted MSMEs and also the informal market. It very much focused on capacity building and employment creation. Also, it looked at enhancing production process, quality, and efficiency. Also, it looked at digitalization, prevention of workplace accidents, and also looked at enhancement of female participation. And what they did, these are just a few examples of gender mainstreaming across gender mainstream measures. So first is that they looked at shop floor interventions, and they hired female male counselors to investigate shop floors to see what can be done. And this was quite significant, having a female counselor into a very to a workplace or a factory setting where there is a lot of formally or traditionally male employees working there. And second point is adoption of compensation schemes. So this includes introducing different compensation packages for their employees and staff who are going through childbirth or childbirth or raising a child or taking care of the elderly and so forth. Different kinds of compensation services have been included. Next is awareness raising of women and men in management boards. So what they have realized in the project is that leadership is very important. So it was very much important to increase awareness among the leaders, the decision makers of the companies, and the prominent figures in the industry. The next point is intensive training courses. They provided different sets of trainings. You maybe have seen the list in the video, but it consisted of both in-person and online trainings, which have made sure that women's participation was maintained throughout the courses. And next is the safe and inclusive work environment. Some of the factories or workplaces did not have female toilets or changing rooms, and hence they invested into making a more inclusive work environment by setting up those facilities and so forth. And last is support for female-owned MSMEs. So these were the kind of these were kind of the few, not all, but you know, the kind of interventions that they have been doing and also continue to do. And the next slides, please. So this is across all UNIDO projects, but not only for this Uday Pride project, but for UNIDO project, we have a guideline to mainstream gender into every single project. And because UNIDO is very committed to gender equality, women's empowerment, and gender mainstreaming, we ask all the projects to mainstream gender into every stage of project design, formulation, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. So this whole process starts with the gender analysis, then thinking about the action plans based off of the gender analysis and implementing them and tracking them through monitoring and evaluation. And this is a very important key point, because what you see is that gender is actually very much integrated into your whole project. So let's move on to the next slide. So there are different case studies, there are different situations, but how do we know what kind of interventions are needed for your specific project, business ideas, and intervention? How do we know that, right? A very good way to do, and this is what also UNIDO recommends when designing a project, but gender analysis becomes the key. So let's move on to the next slide. So the gender analysis, the main purpose of gender analysis is to identify issues and solutions. It answers the questions of where, what, why, how, and for whom the gender mainstream measures needs to take place. It also contains a lot of evidence and data, because without evidence and data, you cannot come up with a good gender mainstreaming measures. And also what I ask for you in any kind of document that you'll submit, including the inception report, we want to see a logical flow, meaning in the gender analysis, we want to see that in country X, Y, and Z, this is the situation, this is the main issue that is going to be relevant and what we can actually aim for, and hence these are the action that we are going to take. So we want to see that kind of logical flow to be presented in the reports that you'll be submitting. And I believe that this gender analysis steps, these are very much, I don't think this is something new or special for gender analysis. I believe that whenever you come up with a new services or new products, you'll be asking these questions as well. And also based off all your decision-making processes based on available data and evidence as well. So it is not, so dramatically different. It's just that it focuses on gender, the gender norms of the country, and what needs to be done. So let's move on to the next slide. So now we would like to do a bit of a practice on gender analysis. So let's say we have a project talking about introducing a new AI technology in India, and we want to focus on capacity building, recruiting new people, so employment creation, and we want to see, well, how and what way we can include gender into this project. So first thing first, if we want to do a gender analysis for such a project, what do we have to look at? So where would be pretty simple, it will be in the Indian context, IT sector. What? So we could see, let's say, participation of women, where these women are working, what kind of issues are present. So after doing a little research, we found out that there is a relatively high participation of women in the industry, so at 34%, which is actually above average of the labour force participation rate across India, from what we have seen in the previous slide. However, when it comes to representation of women across different levels, it turns out that while entry-level positions are 50%, so a woman's participation rate is 50%. However, when we move on to the managerial level, it goes down to 25%. And when it comes to the C-suite, so CEO level, then it becomes less than 1%. So we can see where the problem lies. It's not about not having enough people to work in the industry, but it's just that there is not a supportive environment for women to go beyond, to reach out to the managerial level, to reach that level. Now, the next point is high attrition rate among women. So there's a 30 to 40% rate that women leave, and this, as I've mentioned before, has huge financial implications for the companies and the industry as a whole, because you're losing all these skilled workforce that you have invested in. Next point is the major skills gap. So it turns out that the Indian IT sector, however big, when it comes to specific skills that is needed to grow the AI and AI technology and industry, there is quite a bit of skill shortage across women and men. So what it means is that the skill shortage is very much having a negative implication on the future growth of the AI industry in India. So next slide, please. We will look at the question of, well, why is this happening? So we found out through research is that there is a limited education and training opportunities for both women and men in AI related subject, but especially so for women. Second, the working environment in many of these IT companies is it's quite difficult, that it is rigid and has a very long work schedule. This is kind of portraying the fact that the industry is very competitive and as much as it seems quite an interesting industry to work for, at the same time, it is a hard industry to keep on working in the same sector. Third point is limited career support and gender pay gap. So as we have seen in the previous slide, that there is quite a bit of gap when it comes to managerial representation, and this implies that there's a limited career support, especially for women, and this has implication on gender pay gap. And next is the high attrition, high rate of people leaving the industry. Well, this is very much so that it reflects the fact that that women tend to leave their work because of their life events, birth, childcare, taking care of the elderly. And as a company, what you really have to do is that to make sure that both women and men are in the place to balance all these work and life responsibilities. So let's move on to the next slide. Now, when we think about gender mainstreaming for this specific example, we have to think about, well, who is in the most need? And from all the data that we have seen, it turns out that skilled people, entry level and mid-level career professionals. So skilled entry level, meaning people who have maybe enter the industries and have 2 or 3 years of experiences and have high hopes to go into management level, and also mid-level career female professionals, because their participation is very much limited, and however they are very much experienced and have the knowledge and skills, so that you don't want to lose these people. A second point is women and men with care responsibilities. When we think about childcare and all that, sometimes people may think that it only helps a woman, but actually it also helps the male employees as well. We should not forget that, right? So now the question is how. And when we think about how, what we can do, it always have to, comply with the local laws. So you also have to do the research into the legal framework of the country and the industry that you work for. So in this context, we can say that, okay, we'll want to bring in capacity building opportunities, maybe both in-person and online opportunities. Second is promotion employment of women in mid-level posts. Third, establishing a network of mid-level career women. When there's not a lot of women working managerial level, these kind of network is known to be very important, because women can share information, ideas, and also motivate each other. Camaraderie of employees is, often forgotten, but these are very, very important when it comes to, individual success and also long-term retention of the employees. Next is providing flexible work hours. As mentioned earlier, gender mainstreaming is not only about directing support for women, but also a lot of these interventions is something that would also help men as well. because remember, gender mainstreaming is one part is to think about how can we treat women and men fairly, and also look at their needs. So providing a flexible work hours would not only help the female employees of the company, but also the male population as well. So, and the next point is also true for childcare support. It would not only be directed only at women, but also for the male employees as well, in terms of paternity leave and so forth. The next is provide gender training to recruiters and managers. There could be unconscious bias, very much pertaining in different contexts and gender norms and stereotyping as well. And these can be very much identified and addressed through awareness raising training as well. So this is pretty much the end of today's part 1, gender mainstream, gender analysis. And as I have mentioned before, in the next time we'll talk about identifying data indicators and M&E, and followed by implementation and communication. Next slide, please. But I want to wrap up this session by leaving you with some particular points from today's session. First and foremost, there's often a misconception that gender equality and women's empowerment helps women only. But as we have seen from today's case studies and also different kind of intervention, it actually helps all women and men alike and the society and the economy as a whole. Second point is gender analysis is a very useful exercise that paves the way to identify solutions. And third, very important, we have also talked about how leadership is very important to make sure that gender mainstream measures are not only being designed and planned, but also implemented and followed through. Now, for this GS project, you are the leader. The way you approach your business matters for gender equality and women's empowerment. So thank you very much for listening to this session, and now let's move on to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Azusa-san, for your lecture. So now let's move on to the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please enter them using the webinar's Q&A function. So at this moment, we do not receive any questions. So I'd like to bring up a question that was raised in the Japanese session on this Tuesday. So the first one, so in today's lecture, explanation was provided about the positive aspects of gender equality for business, such as boosting profitability. Are there any disadvantages to initiatives for gender equality, like financial and human resource burdens? So,
thank you very much for your question. This is a very important question, actually. So when we talk about gender mainstreaming, and we, of course, in the session talked about the positive impacts, and gender mainstreaming per se, there's nothing negative about it. However, when it comes to implementation in the very initial phases, there could be setbacks, and there could be costs. So, for example, setbacks in a way that when you try to introduce something new in the workplace, when you try to introduce something new that may change the way things were, the way the things that may challenge the current norms on gender, then what you can expect to happen is that some employees feel a bit anxious. They might feel, well, what is going on? It's a bit different from how we used to do things, of course. So, but this is not only for gender mainstream measures, but you can also say if you change different ways of working in other aspects, then you can also expect that employees may feel confused at the very beginning. However, you can very much prevent this from happening from having a very strong leadership and communicating clearly what is it that you're going to do, why is it that you're going to do, and how it's going to help in the long term. So that's one thing. Second point is the cost. So of course, if there's a workplace or a factory where there was no female toilets or female changing rooms or whatsoever, then obviously there's going to be a cost implication of having need to build those things into to the workplace. Of course, it's going to be costly. However, these are just one-off short-term costs, and also if you think about the long-term advantages of how it impacts a business success in the long term when it comes to reputation, profitability, innovation, there's so much more advantage than all these short-term costs that you may face in the very beginning and the kind of communication that you might hold with the current employees. But that is just a part of the process. So I would say that gender equality per se there's no disadvantages. It's just in the initial, when you want to make a change, there could be initial steps that you have to take. So that would be my answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Azusa-san. So I have one question from the participants. So yes, maybe you can see your Q&A function. So I have a question. If we have a project under consideration for UNIDO grant, as a part of gender analysis, are we supposed to list our issues within our project industry? Or are we supposed to discuss how our project is actually solving the issues? What should be our focus?
So as part of a gender analysis, are we supposed to list out issues within our project industry, or are we supposed to discuss how our project is actually solving the issue? I would say they're both very important points, so you cannot exclude one from the other. So of course you have to list out all the issues that are present within your industry. So, for example, that there's not a lot of women in the management level, or the retention rate is very low, especially among women. So these kind of issues you definitely have to list. And without listing those, we cannot understand the kind of solutions that you're trying to propose. And of course, we would like to also see how you're going to actually solve these issues. These are the gender mainstream actions that we want to see in the Inception report. So I would say both.
Okay, thank you very much for another question. So let me summarize a little bit. So in this presentation, you mentioned that 40% of the participation or the employment rate would be targeted for 40%. So what baseline has been set for female participation under the Global South project? Is it uniform across all countries? This is the question.
Yes, thank you for your question. So yes, also for the Global South project, we set 40% target for capacity building as a bare minimum, and also for employment creation as 40%. And it's indeed very much a very good valid point about how difficult it is to meet that target depending on the country and the industry. So if the industry only has a 16% participation rate overall, how is it even possible to reach 40%? It's a valid point, right? But having said that, what we want to see is that how you approach this gender equality in your project design. We want to see that you very much take consideration of how to increase the participation rate. So are you going to advertise your trainings and employment opportunities through female network channels or female employee networks or advertisement channels, or are you going to approach universities with a lot of women studying? We want to see that approach on how you're going to reach that 40% target. So of course, reaching the target is important, but what we also want to see is how you are planning to reach that target. And we completely understand if this completely understand that this 40% target might be high depending on the sector and the country you work in, but nevertheless that is what we ask for. And in case that a project cannot reach 40% at the end of the day, what we still want to see is what you did. How hard did you try to reach that target? So again, the question of approach. So that would be the answer from my side.
Okay, thank you very much. So that related this question. So let me introduce this question. How to attract the women to an industrial sector or profession that has a low rate of women's participation and representation?
Yes, thank you. Very good question. So it's kind of linked with this 40% target. So there's many things I believe that you can do is, so as I've mentioned, first is to, when you think about trying to foster future female cohort into the industry, you can approach universities that have a high participation of women in the related subjects. You could do that. That's one thing. You could also have career events with those kind of universities, talk about what kind of work that you do, and also to attract more women into your field. And third is if you advertise your new job opportunities, training opportunities, you can also use different platforms which that are very much accessed by women. And also, as we've mentioned before in the presentation, what kind of compensation or workplace environment you're going to provide is going to become a very key aspect when attracting local talent. So whenever you advertise your new job, then you can also talk about the different kind of training opportunities that is going to be provided, different kind of career support that is going to be there, different kind of women's network that you're going to establish, also the compensation schemes that you're going to provide, maternity care, paternity care, childcare support, and if you plan to also create a childcare facility, that also could be one thing. And also you can talk about different mentoring programs that you might do, and you could also highlight any kind of skills training that really focuses on leadership and management skills for men and women. So these kind of things could be very much highlighted, and these aspects are going to be it could be a very much an important decision-making criteria for all the talents that are out there thinking of which companies to apply for. So that will be my answer.
Okay, thank you very much for related to this question and answer. So what consideration should be made when advancing gender mainstreaming while respecting local, social, and cultural contexts?
So whenever you introduce measures, you really have to make a deep dive into the local context, the culture, the decision-making process. And for example, if you are going to do new projects in a rural area, agricultural sector, and you want to involve a lot of farmers to grow a specific kind of tomatoes, for example. But in order to, if you want to include more women into this to this job in income generation, and you realize that all these farmers are, in this farming village, the head of village have a very strong voice about what is good, what should we do, what should we not do, what kind of employment should women and men take. So if you look at these local kind of power dynamics and you really want to recruit women, female farmers, then I think the first thing that you could think about is to really approach this head of village and talk about, gender issues and how you can include more women into your project. And then this village leader will have a very much a strong voice in encouraging these local women. And these are the kind of the gender, the power dynamics that you could always think about in order to make sure that the participation rate will will improve. And when it comes to gender norms, within, let's say, a company context, you could also think about, well, what are the what are the practices that are not working right now and how it could be improved. And if this improvement or change of way of doing things, as I have mentioned before, there might be people who might not approve of such change. So then you have to think about, well, what kind of communication do I have to take in order to inform these changes and make the change happen? So these are the kind of norms and power dynamics that you might want to think about when implementing a project. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. For next question. So what are some gender-related issues specific to the context of countries in the Global South?
In the Global South countries, what we see often is the large informal market. And that is where a lot of women actually work. But the informal market, as the term informal might provoke, is that the legal regulations, labor rights, and those things are not very much managed and controlled, making or keeping women and men in the sector in a very vulnerable position. And so the first step of, in these countries, when we talk about gender equalities and women's empowerment, is how to bring women more into the formal labor market. How can we level up their skills? How can we make sure that these women will not go back to the informal market but stay with you and reap the benefits out of your business? So these are the kind of particular issues that we see in the Global South countries. It's the large informal market. Thank you.
Thank you. So it would be the last question. So it is a little bit specific. So, and it is kind of similar to the previous questions. So in India, the automobile industry has a low female employment rate because the workplace is seen as too harsh for women. And some female employees feel it would be lacking in consideration to have them work there. Should the women's participation rate be raised even in such an environment?
Thank you very much. I think it's not the question of whether we should encourage more women to work in a dangerous, unsafe work environment. The question is how we can improve the work environment, level up the safety standards, so that both men and women would feel comfortable to work in these industries. So that's the main point. And if you can, have a supportive environment where women and men can very much work in a satisfying manner in a very safe environment, that is a win-win situation, both men and women. Just because you're a man, I don't think you would also want to work in an unsafe environment, right? So introducing a safe workplace is very much going to be encouraging positive factor for both men and women, and it would definitely have implication on female workforce participation rate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me conclude the Q&A session and this webinar. So thank you again, Atsuta-san, and everyone who asked the question and participated in this webinar. So this is the end of the webinar. Thank you again for your participation in the first session of the UNIDO Global South Project Gender Mainstreaming Training Webinar Series.